Shorty's good. I'll read another. I'll read some excerpts. I had this bit printed from this new novel, all ready to go, and I wanted to try it out on you.
Don't believe you.
But
Come back later.
I'll come back later. No, I live on the east side, man. It's too far.
So LA.
Yeah.
So LA.
Well, at least I didn't say I had car trouble and didn't come.
True.
Right?
Touche. It's gonna be on the internet, everyone.
So I'm going to read a little bit from the first scene from Stray Dog Winter, which isn't very funny, and then maybe a little bit of the second chapter, and then you'll tell me when to shut up. Anne?
Yes, I will.
Thanks.
Shut up. Oh, too soon?
Okay, I'm done. Thank you. So this is February 1984. This is a literary mystery set partially in Australia and partially in Cold War Moscow between the 1960s and 1984. So it's a weird end of the Soviet era time. And the protagonist is a guy called Darcy Bright, who's a young artist from Australia. And he's going to Moscow to find and be with his half-sister Finn, with whom he has kind of an odd relationship. So February 1984. He arrived in winter on a sleeper from Prague, and the sound of the train went boogity boogity. What do you want, Darcy Bright? Darcy Bright, what do you want? He pressed his open hand against the shivering window, and the edges of the sky seemed unnaturally close. A figure trudging alone in a snow-beaded field with a scythe. A scarfed woman behind a fence shaded her face as if there was sunlight. A row of sheets hung flat behind her, mute as teeth. Darcy pulled up his Pentax and snapped a quick shot, feeling foreign, unaccountable. I could paint that, he thought. Then he noticed the food seller watching from the noisy space between compartments. Darcy lowered the camera, pulled his fur faux Kenzo coat about himself and leaned back against the cold metal railing. He was accustomed to being noticed, his skin paper thin, his sculpted lips. He was too pretty for this train. But men here stared for different reasons, afraid of themselves, suspicious of everyone. The weight of it sat in their faces. It was morning, and Darcy was somewhere outside Kiev, wondering at being in an alien place so quickly. Only 3 weeks since the crackle of Finn's first telephone call. Amid the echoes, she told him how Moscow felt weird and great, but she was lonely. He'd thought of her as many things, but never that, not lonely. The corridor rattled around him. A horse-drawn hay cart waited at a muddy level crossing, the horse unfazed, its nose just feet from the train. Trust me, she told him, breathing into the phone. He'd always been leery of those two words, but if he didn't trust her, he didn't trust anyone. He explained how he'd just been accepted to the fine arts course at Sydney Uni, the graduate program beginning in March, but she persuaded him to defer, seduced him as usual. Come paint here, she'd said. I need you. We'll have fun. Then she'd hung up, and Darcy knew he'd go as much as he knew he shouldn't. The train slipped into a tunnel, and Darcy glimpsed himself in the window, his epicene features checkered by the blur of stones. Don't be paranoid, she said. It only works against you. Spike your hair and be yourself. And on this train panting north through the white flurried snow, he couldn't wait to be back in her orbit, that sense of entitlement that came with their parallel youth and allure. How they looked oddly alike, and how together they moved through the world with a false imperviousness, gliding on tracks of their own. The food seller wedged the trolley against a door. Polish vodka, chunks of cheese, and crackers in plastic, something like saltines. A shot of vodka held a certain promise, but Darcy had given up drinking after Finn had left. It had been easier than he'd expected. It was the encounters with strangers that rattled him still, compelled him. In Prague, the men had mostly watched the ground, living behind their eyes, but as he'd waited alone on a bench in the railway station, a strong-jawed Slavic boy in uniform caught his eyes square on, so knowingly, and Darcy found himself following. Darcy, who'd promised Finn he'd abstain, who'd promised himself, but the uniform had triggered him somehow, its crispness, and all he could manage was to keep the money belt hidden as the young man rested his military cap on the cistern and kneeled. Finn had advised him to get out of Melbourne quietly, and he left without telling a soul, not even his mother. That part was easy. He rarely told anyone much. But now the train guard, not the food seller, observed him, balancing where the carriages shifted on their couplings. The guard who still held Darcy's passport, because there'd been no transit stamp for Poland. Who knew Poland would appear in the night between Prague and Moscow? Finn had never mentioned this. It made him wonder if she knew what she was doing. "Tell them you're staying with me," she'd said. "Let them think I'm your girlfriend." And they'd always been lovers of a kind, their spirit collusive. The way she'd cleaved their family apart had somehow sewn the two of them inexorably closer. And still the train guard, unkempt and woolly in the fashion of Trotsky, stared. Darcy breathed out a misty flute of air and prayed for Finn's bright face at the station, her red caracal coat like a flame in the crowd. So that's how the book opens, with his arrival in Moscow, and then it flips back and forward between him in Moscow and him back in Australia. I might read a short piece from back when he's a kid in Australia. Summer 1969. Darcy lay in bed reading Morris West and smoking. She lay ash into her hand, then let it fall into a crossword magazine. She was nicer in the mornings. "Get me a drink, will you, Darcy?" He didn't wear clothes in the summer when it was only the two of them, just his lace-up school shoes. He was only 9. He poured his mother a gin and tonic from the bottom of the desk, like he always did. "Make it stiff," she said, then laughed as if at a joke. His father had driven up to Melbourne in a combi, delivering farm-fresh eggs to housewives in the city. He'd stay for cups of coffee while their husbands were at work. He went every Tuesday, the day Darcy's mother kept her son at home for company. Darcy put in a slice of lemon and balanced her drink on her trophy tray. She liked a fresh glass for her first of the morning. She propped herself up on a pillow and pushed back her hair. "Feel free to wear some clothes," she said. "It's too hot," he said. He looked out into the garden with his hands on his hips. "I'm going to drive the car." Darcy placed his mother's cereal bowl with the dirty dishes on the kitchen bench, and as he did, the top of a man's head went by the window. "There's someone here," he called to his mother. He covered himself with a tea towel and opened the screen door. The man's hair was chestnut and his suit an even redder brown. His tie had leaves all over it. "Is it the Jesuits?" his mother called out. Darcy wasn't sure. The man had a fine silver necklace with a blue cross hanging from it. "Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints," the man said, and smiled. His nails were clean and even, not bitten like Darcy's mother's or smoke-stained. He had a tattoo on the back of his hand. Darcy turned as he called to his mother. "It's Jesus of the Saturday Saints." "Don't let him in," she shouted. But the man didn't want to come inside. He stood at the bottom of the steps. He had a ring on his thumb. "We don't have any money," Darcy told him. "I'm not here selling anything," the man said. He was from somewhere else, an accent a bit like Darcy's mother's, America or Canada. His tattoo was a coil of barbed wire, and then he saw Darcy looking, pulled up the cuff of his jacket to show him. "It's a crown of thorns," he said. "Do you know what that is?" "It's from Jesus," said Darcy. The man turned his hand over and opened his fingers. There was a rose tattooed on his palm. It looked like a real one. "The Rose of Sharon," said the man. His eyes were deep and brown, kinder than Darcy was used to. "Are you wearing any clothes?" his mother shouted. Darcy could hear her getting out of the bed. "Shoes," he shouted back, "but I'm covered." She was coming up the hall. The man looked as though he knew what would happen as he brushed Darcy aside. "We don't need Jesus," she said, closing the door without even looking at the man. "For Christ's sake, put some clothes on," she said to Darcy. Through the sitting room window, Darcy watched the man walk down the drive. The man took off his jacket and rested it on his arm, looked back, but Darcy didn't see him. Didn't see Darcy there. His mother appeared with a fresh drink from the bottle. She hid behind the plastic bags. It was time for ice, but no tonic. "They usually travel in pairs," she said. "He had a tattoo," Darcy told her. "Oh, really?" she said. "And tight pants, too. I think he was American, like you." I think they watched the man disappear from view, hidden by the trees. "Not my kind of American," she said. "What kind of American are you?" asked Darcy. "Miserable." Darcy went to his